Hey everyone, let's get ready to get energized. It is EG4 Electronics Power Hour, episode 3, and I am your host, John Tostanoski, and I have a special guest with me here today, Mr. Skyler Dyer of Modern SLR. Skyler, how are we doing today?
I'm great, man.
I love it.
Doing good.
That's awesome. So we have I think a pretty chock-filled episode with some really good content here that I want to talk about. I think, the overall theme of the discussion is how EG4 Electronics and how EG4 Electronics batteries can fight against the utility grid, or kind of beating the grid with batteries. And some of the key things I want to discuss are, how the utility rate structures have changed, not just here in Texas where we are filming from, but across the country. And then how the EG4 monitoring platform, like our software platform that you would use on your mobile app or on your desktop, on the EG4 monitoring website, how that technology, things like backup mode, peak shaving, AC charge mode, PV charge priority, forced discharge and export PV, and then self-consumption mode. Those are the main modes I want to talk about, and kind of how you can actually leverage that technology to combat the different rate structures that we see and kind of fight against the grid and really take yourself kind of off grid. If you are grid tied, obviously we're very well known in the off grid community, but if you are grid tied, kind of taking yourself off grid while still being connected to the grid, and maybe even being able to leverage it or potentially monetize the grid by using some intelligent software that we have. So before we get into all that though, I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself, about your story in the solar industry, and kind of, what you do today, some of the things that you offer to your customers that are pretty unique, and what led you down the pathway of looking at EG4. So, if you want to, and I know we shared some interesting points that we were both working for the same place together.
Back in the day for a little bit, yeah.
Back in the day. But yeah, why don't you just tell us your story?
So I started off just trying to make money, right?
Yeah.
Was over at Vivint for a while, was looking for a change, got tired of going around just doing the summer sales stuff, right? So obviously there's some really good money in there, but there comes a point in your life when married, children, all that, like you need to kind of transition out of that, I feel anyway. And so I had a good friend of mine tell me, he kept harassing me, dude, you need to come look at solar. This stuff it's crazy, it's wild. This is the next thing. And so I finally flew out in 2014 out to New Jersey, actually, with Vivint Solar, and just followed him around for a little bit. And I was blown away. I was like, this is a cool product. This is something I can get behind. And took my family, moved out to New Jersey, and we were there for a while with Vivint Solar, and originally started off in the industry just for the money, right? And then it started to align with a lot of my core values and core beliefs. And so I'm a big proponent of owning and controlling the things that you have, and minimizing your costs. And so it doesn't matter how much money you make, but it matters how much money you keep. And so keeping your livelihood and your expenses low is really important to me. And solar can help with that. And that's something that I really get behind. I'm from Alaska. And on the properties that we grew up with, we always had wells on the property.
Yeah.
And so we never had a water bill.
Yeah.
And I thought it was weird when I moved out of the house, and in my dorm room there was a water bill.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. What is this?
What is this? Right?
Yeah.
It comes from God, right? It comes from the sky, right? This is a blessing. Why are we paying for this? It's kind of weird. So I look at solar kind of very similar. Put the well in the property and never pay for it again, right? And you have water. It's a resource. Same thing, put the panels on the roof and you've got a resource, you got electricity, and we have to have it nowadays, especially in Texas. Like it's hot. You gotta have that AC, man.
Yeah.
And so it uses a lot of energy. And so continue to kind of dive into the industry and worked for a few different companies, worked with Legacy for a little while. Love those guys. And then transitioned over and I worked with with the Sunder guys for a little bit. And
Yep.
so Eric Nelson's awesome. That's where actually we both have some common ground there.
Common ground.
And just didn't really like the situation I was in, and kind of pushed me to just, hey, let's just go build my own install company. And built that, ran that for about 3 years, sold that one off, and then I had a contract with a commercial install company to consult with them and help them out for about a year. And that came up a little while ago, and went back into building my own install company, and now we're at Modern SLR. And so I own 30% of Modern SLR and 30% of another company called Modern Financial.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
awesome.
both are services to help customers.
I love it. You know, I think because EG4 has a unique story that, you know, we started off in the off-grid space, and primarily our products used to be used by a lot of DIY consumers, and still to this day, and they're an important part of our customer base, and we still make a lot of products that are driven towards that. Obviously, our main lineup now is really shifting towards looking at the mass market and being able to provide those true solutions that other companies really aren't doing right now. Because the one thing that the off-grid space has always gotten right is it's a true solution to real, true whole home backup.
Yeah.
And so as we continue to grow as a company, we are, you know, kind of bringing that thought process into our new products. And that's a good thing. What I want to address, though, is a lot of the off-grid, you know, and kind of do-it-yourself community, they totally despise the solar salesman, right? But you and I share a similar background, right? Is that, and I think it's important. There are definitely some questionable practices that have taken place in the solar sales industry. But with that said, there are key figures that have come out of the mud, so to speak, like yourself, and I would like to think like me as well, who've actually gone on to get into the installation side. And we did that because we wanted to do it right. We have now transitioned into a space where there are people like you, people like me, and many others out there. In fact, I would say at this point in time, probably most others out there that are truly focused on doing it the right way and providing a true solution. So when I talk about providing a true solution, that true whole home backup solution, or just a solution that works honestly, we definitely need that now. And the reason why we need that, and you're probably aware of this too, is the utility rate structures have completely changed. And the idea of, and for the audience that doesn't know this, you know, there's this thing that used to exist. And in only a handful, not even a handful, I could count the number of states on one hand where you still have net metering, or essentially what's one-to-one solar buyback.
It's getting sparse, yeah.
It's getting really sparse. And what that means is, you know, so everyone out there understands is, let's just say that you produce $1 worth of electricity from your solar panels and you don't use that energy. If you don't use that energy, it will bypass or flow back to the grid. They call that sell back. It will sell back to the grid, and the grid, or your utility company or your retail energy provider, there's different models out there depending on where you're at in the country, that company that you sent that energy back to, in the past, they would credit you. If you sent them $1, they would credit you $1 worth of energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a dollar for dollar ratio. And what happened is that ultimately, you know, you could say that the utility companies got greedy. That might be a little bit of it. You could also say that our energy demands really is what changed. And I think that's the reality of the situation, because ultimately the utility company needs to stay in business. And I can appreciate that. But the reality is the population has grown so much and our energy demands have increased so dramatically over the course of the last 10 to 15 years.
Oh, and it's not stopping.
And it's not stopping. You have
Up and to the right.
We
Hard.
talked about it in the last episode. You have AI data centers, which are predicted to use more energy than any other product scope that we've seen outside of EVs, electric vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
Then you compound that with electric vehicles and the demand on the grid that they put on the grid, which the EV is a great thing. And the driving experience is amazing. I mean, if you get an EV, you know, if you've not driven one, you should drive one because it's pretty cool.
It is. It's a
The
cool
instant
experience.
torque, right? And I'm a car guy myself. You know, it's an amazing product, but you know, it's something we need. We do need the world to be a better place, and I think that is a step in the right direction. There are downsides, there is skepticism, there are questions. Totally get it, but at the end of the day, the demand for electricity is drastically increasing, and the way that we have seen the energy mix come about is pretty crazy. And so they're raising the utility rates, and the utility rate structures are changing. What are some of the things that you've seen in your part of the industry in terms of the utility rates?
That's a great question. So I predicted this back in 2020 when I moved here. The storm hit in 2021 and shut the grid down in the state of Texas and just wrecked the infrastructure here. I think it was a $2 billion loan they took out from the state. They paid for companies to come in and consult them on how to fix the grid. ERCOT's now not going to be a loan, but we can import and export from the other two grids in the United States. At that point, I knew prices were going to go through the roof. Best prediction for the future is typically always the past. New Jersey had a very similar situation. The big hurricane that came through New Jersey, was it Hurricane Sandy?
Yeah,
I believe.
Hurricane Sandy.
And so before Hurricane Sandy, prices were actually pretty low. And then Hurricane Sandy came in, wrecked the infrastructure, and they had to fix it. Well, that takes money. And where do you get the money from? You either have to borrow it or you have to raise prices. And in this case, they had to borrow it and raise prices. And that's when New Jersey's prices went up to about 18 to 20 cents. And so the other thing I think is happening over the course of the last 10 years or 11 years that I've been in the industry is you're seeing two different entities trying to learn how to work with each other. Power companies don't really know how to work with us. We don't really know how to work with the power companies.
Yeah.
And every time regulation comes in, what do? We try to circumvent it.
Yep.
And we've seen that in Hawaii. Hawaii was the first one, right? They shut the grid down, said, hey, nobody can interconnect into the grid. What'd they do? They brought in batteries.
Yeah.
And so now everybody's just like, okay, well, we're going to continue to go solar, but we're just going to circumvent you and we're not going to give it back to you.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't think that's the answer. There shouldn't be this fight, right? Because solar has so much to give and batteries have so much to give as well, that I think there needs to be more learning and commingling in that, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be a lot more bipartisanship between solar, batteries, and the grid infrastructure. And with that, time's going to cure this, right? We're going to learn how to work with each other. Rates will probably stabilize a little bit. Hopefully they don't continue to go up and to the right all the time. And so, I mean, there's states and power companies right now, they're just insane. People are getting to the point where they can't afford their electric bills.
Oh yeah, in California, and that's actually, I think, an interesting point is California used to be the poster child for solar energy. And it still kind of is in a lot of ways, right? They do, the state does really incentivize people to still go solar. It makes a lot of sense there. You basically have to have a battery. You have to have an ESS system.
Mm-hmm.
EG4 Electronics has a lot of popularity out there because of the robust capabilities of our inverter and battery ESS combination, right? 14.3 kilowatt hours on our wall mount battery.
Big system.
Yep. And our inverters have, on the FlexBoss 21, you're going to have 16 kilowatt, with PV present of AC continuous power. With our new FlexBoss 18, you'll have 13 kilowatt of AC continuous power with PV present, 10 if the power is out. So really, really great product feature set for that market and for every market. But what we've seen now is that they're still kind of the poster child in a lot of ways, but that wave of them taking away what used to be net metering 2.0. And for those that don't know, net metering is that's the technical term for if you give $1 to the grid or 1 kilowatt hour to the grid, meaning you don't use it, but you produced it, we will give you one back at an equal
What's
rate.
that worth? Yeah.
That was what that was. It was used to be called net metering 2.0. Now it's NEM 3.0, which basically saw I want to say a 75% reduction in the value of the solar credits that you sold to the grid. We saw that wave move from California state by state by state. It's already made its way to Texas.
Oh, it's been here.
It's been here, right?
It's been here. People just didn't want to acknowledge it.
Right, because in Texas, Texas is a deregulated market, which means that you have choice in your provider. I like to call it the illusion of choice because at the end of the day, your energy still comes from one source, and there is one thing that you cannot combat, and that is called the TDU delivery charge. So it's about 5 cents right now. It is a variable rate, right? But ultimately, there are retail energy providers that may market themselves as saying, oh, we have a one-to-one buyback program, but you can't excuse the additional 5 cents. So if you talk about selling a significant amount of energy back to the grid, and let's say you don't have batteries, which you definitely should, and because if you don't have batteries, you can't keep that on site. All your excess energy is going to go to the grid. And guess what? If you send them, let's just say you send them 1 kilowatt hour, in essence, to keep it super simple, they're going to charge you an additional 5 cents.
It's like bringing your money from Mexico to the United States. It's not going to be worth as much.
It's not going to be worth as much.
That's the sad thing. And customers are pissed. There's a lot of customers that got into the game. Halfway through the game, everybody changed the rules, and they're trying to score, and they can't because now the goalpost is 50 yards the other direction.
Yep.
And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's really it is really frustrating. And I feel for the consumer. I feel for myself, which is why I have invested in my own energy storage system at home. We also have rate schedules out there that we see in different markets, like Arizona.
Arizona, yes.
Right, where some of the utilities out there, what they do is they charge. There's something called a time of use rate schedule. And for those of you that don't know what a time of use rate schedule is, it's basically you are charged at different rates for your electricity per kilowatt hour, depending upon the time of which you use that electricity. So for example, let's say you're using your electricity at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Most people are not at Monday through Friday. Most people are not home, right? So they might not
off peak.
Yeah, that's what they call off peak, right? And since most people are not home, guess what? The rate is very low, right?
Well, interesting. So I just called a buddy of mine over at Fusion Power because I have a customer in Phoenix that wants a battery.
Okay.
Actually wanted solar. And Tyler McAllister, actually, he's the owner of Fusion. Good guy.
Okay.
He actually wants me to connect you guys.
All right.
So I'm not as familiar with the Arizona market, and I was like, Tyler, just help me out, right? I don't know this market very well, but I want to take good care of them. And I think you guys probably know the industry there in Arizona probably better than anybody. So he went through the electric bill, and he said, actually, it doesn't even make sense for this guy to have solar. He says, we're just going to sell him a battery.
Yes.
And what was also really interesting is he said they've actually flipped the on-peak and the off-peak. So they're actually charged more in off-peak and less in on-peak.
Really?
Where this customer was, which is weird. That's not typically what you see.
Yeah.
You typically see on-peak, the rates go up. Off-peak, the rates go down.
Yep.
But they've flipped it there, which is really interesting. And so...
That's really interesting. And so the utilities have gotten very creative in how to offset their costs, right?
Oh, very creative. That's always
very
changing.
Creative. And you see a lot of these time of use rate schedules where, again, like, during certain hours of the day, you could be charged as high as 45, 50 cents. And then in that off-peak time, it may be like 12 cents.
Yeah.
Well, the question becomes, how do you work with that system, right?
Buy low, sell high.
Right, buy low, sell high, right? And I think that gets us into the technical portion of our discussion here And probably the thing that I'm most excited to just talk about is you have these different rate schedules. What are some of the things that you can do if you decide to go solar? If you decide to add, maybe not even go solar like you mentioned, which is actually what I've done at my house.
It's smart.
You're right. I have an ESS system, but I don't have solar panels, and I'll explain that.
Yeah.
There's, what do you do to combat these different rate schedules? There's a lot of different things you can do. And in our EG4 monitoring platform, in our software set, we have something called working modes. And you'll see as we post some of these images up on the screen, working modes are designed to put your ESS, whether it's a FlexBoss and a gridboss combination with a wall mount battery, or it's, if you're using our server rack battery technology, or if you're on the 18 kpv or the 12 kpv, you can do these things. You can put your batteries on these working modes, right? And what you can do is you can put it on a working mode. One is called backup power or backup mode. One is called peak shaving. One is called AC charge mode. The other is PV charge priority. The other is forced discharge or export PV only. And then the other is self-consumption mode. Now, straight out of the box, the inverter and the battery come in self-consumption mode. And basically what that means is your solar energy that's coming down, if you have solar, it will power the home. Whatever is not used, right?
Charge the batteries.
Is going to charge the battery. And then if the battery is full, then it goes to the grid. And it kind of operates in not so much the reverse, but, basically if you don't have solar present, meaning you don't have any sunlight on your solar panels,
pull from the batteries.
it will pull from the battery first, and then if the battery is depleted, then it will pull from the grid. And that's kind of called self-consumption mode. Self-consumption mode is going to be what you will see typically in a generic utility rate structure. But what if I'm in California or Arizona or wherever it may be, a state with this time of use rate schedule, where there's an off-peak and an on-peak? What I might want to use is the peak shaving feature.
So one thing I'd like to jump in there on and touch on, and I think a lot of people need to know this, is there's so many sales reps and so many people that ask me, well, what is my battery going to offset? What's that going to give me as far as offset is? What's that going to do for me here? And one thing a lot of people don't realize is batteries are dumb.
Yeah, yeah.
They're just gas tanks.
Yeah, that's a gas tank. Yeah.
That's all they are. You have your fuel pump, which is your inverter.
Yep.
Right? And then you've got your gas tanks. And unless you have a management system that's telling the fuel pump what to do, it tells the batteries what to do, right?
Yep.
Either to pull them or to discharge them or to charge them.
Yeah.
And so, that I think a lot of people need to understand that batteries are just very simple gas tanks. That's all they are. And that you have to have these smart energy management systems that are built out properly, like companies like EG4 has done, to actually capitalize on that. If you don't have that, you're buying just dumb gas tanks. That's all you're buying is capacity.
Yep.
And that's a very, very big thing that people need educated on. And in the future, moving forward, without the software in the back end of these systems, it's pointless to have the gas tanks.
Yep.
Because you're not able to capitalize on what the grid is doing and how the grid is moving and shifting. Because the most consistent thing in business is change. And what have we seen in the past 10 years with power companies? They change all the time. They're always moving the needle.
Yeah.
And so if you want to be ahead of that, the only way you can is to have these smart battery systems, so you can constantly tweak and adjust and manipulate how the battery is operating for that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're constantly making changes to our software. Our customers that are closest to us, they know we've made some recent updates to software and to our monitoring portal. We're continuing to make updates, and I'm excited to say there are some really, really cool things coming that are going to make this even more fanciful, right? And even easier and better. But what we have today works incredibly well. for those and to kind of continue where I was with peak shaving. So in the peak shaving mode with our inverter and battery combination, you can do something where essentially if you are on a peak rate schedule where again it could be really really high at certain parts of the day and really really low at other parts of the day, you can actually program the inverter and battery to basically discharge to the home when the rate is really high, because you want to eliminate any potential from pulling from the grid at that time.
Yeah.
And then you can either charge from the grid or ensure that you're charging from PV when the rate schedule is much lower, right? And using it in a scenario where you can charge from the grid when the rate is low and discharge when the rate is high, you can basically leverage a system where you might not be able to, where you might not, I shouldn't say not be able to, but where you might not even need solar panels. Perfect example, in Texas, there's a way that you can leverage the utility plan if you're in the deregulated market, where there's basically no charges at certain times of the day, but then at other times of the day or at night, it's super high, right?
Very aggressive.
So what you can do is when the rate is very low or the rate doesn't even exist at all, sometimes you see this with like a free nights plan. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, right? But it does exist. And it is, it's not going to completely eliminate your electricity bill, but it may bring it from $300-$400 down to like 15, 20, 50 bucks a month, depends, right? But you can really shave off a ton of money, and make a lot of savings for yourself, keep more money in your pocket. In addition to that, now you have a true whole home backup solution on your home. So what you can do is, let's say you're on a free nights plan, you can charge the battery, right, at night, and you're charging that battery for free.
Power the home, charge the car, charge the batteries.
You can charge your EV car, all that stuff. And then you can discharge from your batteries when the rate changes in the morning and it goes up very high. And if you have with an EG4 ESS, with a FlexBoss, with something like that, you probably want like 2 inverters and at least 4 batteries, maybe 6 or more batteries. But now you have robust backup and you have the ability to really produce some real savings for you as a homeowner.
So the interesting fact is about that, on that same topic that you're on, a lot of people think that the power grid holds power, and it does not. The power grid is just a river. They turn it on, the power flows. They turn it off, it stops. The power grid cannot hold power without batteries, right? Without capacity. And it does not hold, it just flows. And so the power company cannot hold power when rates are low and sell when high. They can't do that. It's just a river and it flows, and whatever's eaten is eaten. And if there's too much demand, they just dial the power, or they dial the power down a little bit. And so, but as far as capacity, there is no capacity. This is something that power companies actually, you might touch on this, I'm not sure, but VPPs are becoming extremely popular because it's actually helping the power companies out there. And I think that's, I have my own opinion on that. For my own personal home, I probably wouldn't want to be a part of a VPP because I like the independence. I like to be disconnected from that, and I don't want somebody to have control over that. But other people would like to be able to capitalize on the money, on the transactions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually talked a little bit in our last episode about the VPP. For those of you that don't know, it's a virtual power plant, but you know exactly how it works. Why don't you explain how it works, like from a from a retail customer's perspective?
So I'm not a professional at the VPPs, and so but from my understanding,
didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I was actually on the way here. I was listening to a podcast. I'm good friends with another friend in the battery sector, and he'd sent me 2 different podcasts on VPPs.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but Sunrun is not labeling themselves as a solar company anymore.
They're not.
They're labeling themselves as an energy company.
Yeah.
Because VPPs are where they're going deep. They're diving deep down into that market.
Yeah.
And so VPPs, what they essentially do is they partner with power companies to help them harness power and to hold it when it's not needed and to release it when it is needed. And customers can play into this as well. And it's actually, there's quite a bit of benefit there for the homeowner. And the cool part about it is, and this is what it's saying in the agreement, is they're not going to deplete the batteries during an emergency or catastrophic event, right? Or a blackout, things like that. But they're basically leveraging the customer's batteries during high demands. Okay, so if it's extremely cold in Texas, what do we always see? Turn your thermostats down or the grid's going to
Yep.
crash, right?
Yep.
And so 2021, this was the poster child of that.
Oh, it was
horrible.
catastrophic. People died.
Yeah, 4 days. I had a whole warehouse full of generators and stuff down in Arlington. I lived up in McKinney, and for 4 days I had no power in my home. We were renting a home, and it was so frustrating that I had all that stuff down there, but I couldn't even get down there. The roads weren't maintained. It was
Yeah.
a nightmare.
It was a nightmare.
And but those instances, those scenarios have brought up better thinking, better ideas, better technology to move these things forward. And VPPs will help with those situations to level out the grid. Instead of having these big demands, it can actually help fulfill those demands without crashing the power plants and crashing the power lines, the substations, the transformers, and all these things.
Yeah, yeah, and EG4 is we're aggressively working on launching basically our battery and inverter compatibility. There are some programs that we're already on, but the goal is within a very short time frame, within this year, we hope to be on pretty much 100% of the available VPP programs that exist through utilities across the nation.
James teased me about that.
Yeah.
Right about December, and I keep bugging him. I'm like, dude, tell me more about this.
Yeah, no,
and he's like, I don't have it ready yet.
we're almost there. Actually, some of them we are there on, and we're almost there to go like totally nationwide. But basically, the way that works is there's all these different with a VPP, a virtual power plant. There's all these different.
A lot of middlemen.
Yeah, there's a lot of middlemen.
Yep.
But ultimately, what's important for the audience is that really the way that it works is, and to explain this from a deeper level, you might ask the question, what does a duck and solar have in common? There's something called the duck curve, right? And so the duck curve, the reason why they call it that is because it's shaped like a duck's back, right? Like a duck flowing through the water. It has a curvature to it, and its little tail flips. Think of a rubber ducky in the bathtub, right? That back shape is the duck curve. Solar produces energy across a duck curve, meaning in the morning it starts to ramp up.
That's the problem with solar.
That's the problem with solar. It gets really high midday, and then it ramps down. Now, when you look at the utility rate demands, the utility demands or the demand on the grid, it goes the opposite direction, right? The demand goes way down in the middle of the day and then skyrockets at 6 p.m. when everyone gets home from work.
And solar's
going down.
Yep.
So battery technology has the ability to basically, the way that it works is the utility company comes in and says, hey, we have this problem with the duck curve, okay? We love the fact that you're producing all this solar energy, but net metering is a thing of the past. You have to have a battery now if you're going to have solar in your home. Otherwise, it pretty much doesn't make sense. Also, it's good to have the backup, right? That's can be a life-saving thing. But outside of that, the utility is saying, hey, there are megawatts upon megawatts, even gigawatts of energy stored on these existing batteries on people's homes. I'll make a deal with you. You know, this is speaking as the utility company, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, I'll make a deal with you. If you let me have some of the energy in the battery when I need it, I will pay you for that. And the reality is that some of these payouts are incredibly lucrative.
Yeah.
And because EG4 has a value proposition built into our model where we genuinely want to. It's in our name, it's in our slogan, right? Energy generation for everyone, without sacrificing quality in the product, and I mean, basically, say it the opposite way. We have some of the highest quality products out there. We have some of the best hardware feature sets out there, but we're still giving it to the consumer, even if it's passed through as an installer, because you have to absorb that cost, right?
It's a great price point.
It's a great price point.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these rebate programs are more than what the homeowner's cost of the battery is. So it's more than just paying for it. So this stuff is coming. It's kind of already here. It's not fully deployed across every utility. You know, we don't see VPPs quite everywhere, but I do believe that that is a big part of the future of solar.
Oh, I think so. Solar and the energy community. Like, I think power companies are going to start adopting this massively.
Yeah.
Because they've missed out on the solar and they feel slighted, right?
Yep.
And you start poking around in a few industries, oil and energy, you're going to make some people mad.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's part of the reason why I can consistently say, because I still do have friends in the solar sales side of the space. Even though, you know, I've not been in that part of the industry for some time now, I still have a lot of connections there. I mean, we were mentioning, you know, Eric and Corey, and they're, you know, they're good friends of mine, and I love those guys dearly. But I know that there are still some of my former colleagues that are selling solar. It's just PV.
Yeah, the old barbaric way. Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, like this is not good in a way, because the backbone of energy independence is now the battery system.
Oh, 100%.
It's the backbone.
I haven't sold a straight PV system in almost 2 years. I refuse to. It's a hard stance for me. One is I don't like frustrated customers. And so it's doing the customer a disservice. And so I like to sleep at night. Yep. I don't want to wake up at night and have somebody yelling at me on the phone, or first thing in the morning, an email or a text message. And so I get those already from past customers, but that's different, right? Because the rules changed for those people. And so, great, I have opportunities for you guys. I have results for those now, right?
Yeah.
But customers moving forward, they need to have batteries. This is it's a pertinent object to the
100%. And like, it's like when I first got here to EG4, I knew quite a bit about DIY and off-grid solar, or just the ideation of not being connected to the grid at all. I knew a fair amount just because I was in the industry. And at my former, you know, place where I worked, we had done some off-grid installations, but I had no idea as to how far ahead that part of the industry was in its thought process, because they knew that ultimately the battery is the backbone of your system.
Yeah, without that, it's dead.
Right. They knew that, and they were light years ahead. Mm-hmm. And now we bring that experience from EG4 into the grid tied community, and we have, I feel, a strategic advantage. Some of the other things I want to mention is, and this is something that you might not see, but something like a export PV only, or a forced discharge mode, ultimately, in some, and that's a feature set that we have in our software. Ultimately, that feature set, you can set that in the monitoring portal for different parameters, and one of the key parameters may be that you can't export your battery energy to the grid. There are some utilities out there where you're only allowed to export your PV energy to the grid.
They don't want you capitalizing on that.
They don't want you capitalizing on that. So there are some places where you can't do that. And there are places like that in California, the most dense solar and energy market in the country.
Yeah.
You actually, for most of California, they do not want you exporting your PV to the grid in many places. And where that gets tricky is from a manufacturer's perspective, and then from an installer's perspective. From the manufacturer's perspective, we need to ensure that we have the technology to ensure that your battery is charged and it can discharge to the home and provide power to loads in the home. But that PV energy, we need to keep that separate, right? And this is part of the beauty of the hybrid inverter technology is that we can keep things separate.
Mm-hmm.
You can ensure that if you're going to export or sell back energy to the grid, that you're only doing your solar energy and not the energy that's been stored in your battery. In addition to that, one of the things that's pretty interesting is there may be some utilities out there where they don't want you to sell back at all.
So it's funny you bring that up. So when I was in Jersey, they would have blackout areas where you cannot sell solar in these areas. A good friend of mine, Brian Brownlee, was selling in Philadelphia. I've never seen solar get turned down so much. The infrastructure in the Philadelphia area it's horrible. They would continuously deny interconnection into the grid because the transformers could not handle it. The great thing about these ESS systems is they can essentially separate you from the grid and not backfeed that into the grid. You can bring it back into your battery and you can actually go solar in those areas.
100%. Yeah.
And we're going to see that more and more across the nation. You're going to see these areas that they can't handle the load.
Yeah.
They have their load going through it. And if you're pushing back, there's tension there on the transformers. You'll blow them up.
There's no doubt that our grid is on the tipping point, right? I mean, we haven't had a major, aside from new power plants coming online, because there's two parts, not just two.
It's ancient.
Yeah.
It's the most
ancient.
vulnerable. From a political standpoint and DOD, it is the most accessible or what's the right word? Vulnerable part of our country is the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure.
100%. There's multiple steps to this process of getting electricity to your home. There's a lot of steps in the process, but when we talk about and the utility companies like to make big waves, and I'm not against the utilities. I do believe we need to partner with them, but they like to make a big wave.
They do.
They build a new power station, but that doesn't mean that the way it gets to your home has changed.
It's not cheaper.
You still need transmission lines, right?
Yep. And
guess what? Electricity is going to find the path of least resistance. And, your transmission lines are what carries all of that energy. And if they're not up to snuff, it's going to be an issue. And we already know that it hasn't seen a major update since we built it out. Yeah. So it's time for an overhaul, but that's not going to happen because
it's
far too costly.
The amount of money I mean, look at wire in our industry. I mean, running wire from that wall to that wall for a battery. Yep. We're talking what, $3,000-4,000?
Yeah.
It's insane. It's a lot of money.
Yep.
And so factor that into your power lines. Like, I don't think people really want that cost coming to them because that's where it's going to go. It's going to get passed down the line to their delivery charges, to their electric charges, to upgrade fees. And that's substantial.
Yep, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about forced discharge and export PV only. That's going to be a helpful resource for anyone that goes into our monitoring software or any potential new customers out there. It's good for you all to know that we have this technology built into our software to work in cooperation with your grid. And other things like weather optimization is a feature set that we also have. But you were going to mention something.
So, funny story. I've had a gridboss FlexBoss and 42.9 kW on my home for roughly a month. Got PTO'd. I had a really funny phone call the other day.
And do you have additional solar coming in?
I've got 14 kW PV on the roof. 42.9 kWh or kW capacity in battery. Gridboss, FlexBoss, the brand new setup. Okay. I love it, by the way. Awesome. It's my guys that installed it for me. They absolutely love how easy the install process and the commissioning more specifically, because you don't need to commission the FlexBoss. You just need to commission the Gridboss, and it pairs directly with it, and it's up. So pretty simple as far as that
You're
process
just
goes.
tying the dongles to the same station, right?
Yes.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
so there's not more commissioning or more work on that side. But anyway, my power company called me the other day and they're like, "Hey, we see that you have solar, but are you sure it's working?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's working." I'm like, "Why do you ask?" And she's like, "Well, you haven't been using any power and you haven't been giving us any power. Like your net is zero." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's because I have it set up not to export power to you."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, do you want it like that?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want. I don't want to give you power." And she's like, "Oh."
I mean, she's probably thinking like, wow, there's all these people with, because quite frankly, far too many people don't have the battery. They should look at adding the battery to their existing PV. They're probably, she's probably calling saying, man, where's my money?
Yeah.
You were sending me
What's going on?
electricity
Yeah.
and I was able to give you, 50 cents on the dollar for it. Where is that?
Yeah. And
That's
so
funny.
I've been going through all the different modes and playing around with them and watching my settings. And it's been really cool on my end and educational on my end. And the reason I like that is I can sit in front of somebody and go, "Oh, it's a software fix."
Yeah.
Most of the time the customer doesn't believe that. They're like, "No, no, no, it's up on the roof. So you need to fix something up there." I'm like, "No, that's it's not how it works anymore." It's
Yeah.
like tuning a car with a computer. That's all we need to do. We just need to reset some configurations and open it up a little bit more.
Yeah,
Right? The
yeah.
voltage or whatever. And we can manipulate this or configure it how we want to nowadays. And that is the coolest part and the coolest thing I've seen in this industry in a long time. The batteries are fascinating. It's where the industry is. It's where the industry is going. It's diving hard into that R&D, into the research and development. The money's going into batteries. But the software settings that EG4 has is absolutely wild. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, and we're growing it too. We're growing that feature set, and I'm excited to grow that feature set. I do want to make sure I hit on two other things. One is for people in your shoes that may not be actually in Texas. This is becoming a concern, and I will say this is one of the reasons why installers are looking to start using EG4. One of the options that we have the ability to exercise within our software is some utilities are saying, hey, we only allow a certain limit of continuous power sellback onto our grid. So like basically you can't export
Capping.
they want to cap it in terms of the amount of power that they like, the not the total kilowatt hours, but the total kilowatt. Right?
And then past that point they get nothing.
Yeah,
There's no credit.
It's not just that. It's because to your point, what you mentioned, the grid may be a little old and unstable, right? So instead of you having
So it's a safety concern.
yeah, like a total sellback output of like on a FlexBoss 21, let's say that's 16 kilowatt. What they might come to us and say when an installer is submitting a permit for that, the utility might come back and say, hey, you need to limit your inverter to 16 kilowatt.
Or the voltage.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting enough, there was one of the permits I got, or the PTO we got. My sister runs my back end for me on PTO and permits. She actually brought up something like that, and it was really interesting. And we submitted the plan sets from EG4, and they're like, "Oh, okay, this actually meets the standards that we're setting forth, the new standards." And I didn't really understand that, but it makes sense now that you're bringing it up.
Yeah.
We are seeing that.
We're seeing that. And so with some architectures that exist, that technology just simply doesn't exist. With the hybrid inverter technology that we offer and with our software feature set, what you can do as an installer is just simply call us, or call our tech support.
And your support is amazing. I will say it is top notch every
That warms
time.
my heart.
And you've been a big help in that too, and helping me find the right people to talk to. But every time I call in, I know I'm interrupting you here for a second.
No, you're good.
But they're just always happy. You can tell they got a smile on their face, and they're not in a rush to get you off the phone.
Yeah.
And that's been very, very welcoming. like just a breath of fresh air. I know I can tell my customer, look, if you have a problem and you want to change the settings, don't do it yourself. Because I've had a customer turn the system off the
Oh yeah,
entire
yeah,
home.
yeah,
Did I tell you that story?
yeah,
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
my guy had to drive from like freaking South Fort Worth all the way up to McKinney and didn't get back home till like 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was just a simple setting that
Yeah.
this guy was playing around with. So I tell my customers, don't play around with it yourself.
Yeah.
Call Signature or call EG4 support line,
Yeah.
and they will gladly help you configure this for you.
Yeah,
And that's been
absolutely.
amazing.
No, and we do have great partners over at Signature Solar as well, or whichever distributor you choose to buy from. But it is advisable that a professional does manage and monitor these settings for you.
It is pertinent.
That is pertinent. But ultimately, we're seeing a lot of situations, like I was saying, where you have to limit the amount of energy that you do export to the grid.
Yeah.
And sometimes we call that an export limit or a sellback limitation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the cool things that installers that are considering our product that you should be aware of is you can go ahead and install the system, and when you're commissioning it, you can reach out to us, and there's kind of a process. So I would say reach out to your business development manager or your account manager,
Get the guidelines.
or myself. I'll make sure that we reach out to you, and we will get you the sellback limit letter. So if you take the sellback limit letter, ultimately what that is you give us the serial number of the inverter that you're going to install, right? And then you tell us how much you need us to limit the AC sellback to,
Mm-hmm.
to accommodate your AHJ.
And where will the customer find that? From their power providers?
So the customer probably is not going to know it, right? That's a great question. It's going to be the installer, right?
Because that's where's the installer going to find that as well? And
so in the permit process, right? Each
PTO.
AHJ is going to have. It'll definitely be before
before
PTO.
PTO in the interconnection process.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be way before that. It'll be probably when you go to submit the permit. They might ask for you.
Would it be with the city though, or would it be with the power provider?
It could be with the AHJ. That's a great point. It could be with the city, which is an authorities having jurisdiction. We call it an AHJ.
Yeah.
It could be with the utility as well. So when you go to submit for interconnection, great point. It could be with them. They may come back and say, "Hey, we need you to essentially derate the sellback to the grid, not to your home, but to the grid on this inverter. Can you do that?" We can do that. The installer would send us what limit we need to set it at, and then we can actually lock that out. And we provide an engineering letter to your utility or to your AHJ showing that it's been locked out, and they accept that letter. And so that just speaks to the variability and the flexibility of the EG4 product lineup, and being able to install it in so many different use cases, from as little as a 2 kilowatt system, or from AC coupling to, with adding batteries to an existing solar system.
Which is very popular right now.
Very popular right now, and the EG4 architecture makes it
flawless.
Sesame Street simple, as awesome. I call it, right?
Done a few of those myself, doing many more.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that you were doing some, and obviously we can't mention their name, but you were doing a string system, right? You were retrofitting a string system. So customer had existing solar, right?
Yep.
And ultimately, if you wanted to upgrade to the manufacturer's battery that originally made the string system, it would have cost an arm and a leg to do that.
Well, you wouldn't have been. Most of these systems, even Lynn Jurich was talking about this on the podcast I was listening to. Most of their customers from years ago cannot get batteries because the inverters can't handle it. So they have to upgrade the inverter, and then they have to get the battery. They have all the labor for that. It's extensive. And so it's much better just to do a simple retrofit with like a gridboss scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you genuinely feel that way, and I know you've expressed that, and I see you on Instagram all the time, and you're
Sky the solar guy.
Sky the solar guy on Instagram. And we'll plug that again one more time before we wrap up. But you do a lot of battery add-on systems because you genuinely feel for the people that are not able to capitalize on just solar alone now.
Well, it's a concern, and I think it's not just a Texas thing. Obviously, most of my work is in Texas. Texans are very independent people. They want independence. They
Yeah.
want to feel secure and safe. They want to own it, and it's theirs, right? But I feel like a lot of Americans across the United States feel the same way. They don't necessarily want to be subject to a power outage, to a power plant going down, or those situations. They want to be independent. They want to have that safety net for their family in case something happens. And so I make pretty good money. You make pretty good money. I don't want to be in my house and when it's 110 degrees outside dying trying to sleep. Like, I don't want that.
No.
I want to be comfortable in my home. I make enough money to be able to do that. And this gives a solution to be able to do that. Everybody should have the ability to do that. And so being subject, and we've seen it, not to get political, but we've seen this in the past few years. You can't necessarily rely on the government to be there for you. And I'm not taking any political side here, but we need to be responsible for our houses, right?
100%.
We need to be the head of the household and taking care of our houses. We have insurance, we've got food supplies, we got savings or credit cards for emergency funds. Why do we not have emergency power, right?
Yeah.
This is a very important resource that we should be controlling and preaching a little more about.
I know like it's said far too often, but it is the truth. It's a no-brainer.
It
It
is.
really is. It's a no-brainer to want to be energy independent.
You're already paying for it.
You're already paying for it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the funny thing is everybody's already paying for it. We can already, what we're doing is we're just shifting where that bill's going,
Yeah.
right? So you're already paying for it. You might as well have energy independence, and you might as well put that towards something where you're going to have an end date to it.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. You do that with your mortgage. You do that with your car. You don't rent your cars. You don't rent your homes, right? Some people do, right? But the goal is the American dream. And that's, again, that's one of the reasons why I'm in solar. The American dream is to be successful, buy a house, buy a piece of property, pay for it, retire, and live comfortably.
Yeah.
Now, on these little devices that we carry around, how many people are trying to get $10 a month from you? And that it's a great business model. And we saw that occur in the 2000s, right? That everybody went to a subscription-based model. It's great for profitability. It's great to get good products out to people. But at the end of the day, the older you get, the less money you make.
Yeah.
And you need to be accounting for that. And so getting rid of an electric bill is massive.
Yeah.
So my neighbor was, he's like, oh, my bill's not very bad. It was only $500 or $600 last month.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
That's a big electric bill, buddy.
$500 or $600.
Yeah.
And he says that's not that
And
bad.
he said that wasn't bad. And I'm like, what planet are we living on?
Oh my gosh.
Like, I don't
I
get
can't
it.
even believe that.
No, I mean, and his house is a little bigger than mine. It's all electric. I have propane.
Yeah.
But he's just like, yeah, it wasn't bad. I think it was like $550. I'm like, dude, that's a car payment for a lot of people across America.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot more than my car payment.
And so it's just reality, right?
Wow.
Perspective is everything. But again, I think some people have, in the podcast, I think they were talking about it as kilowatt delusion.
Yeah.
Where they're just delusional about the amount of power that they're using. And, they're mad about the power company or whatever. But the reality is they're using a lot of power, or they just think that it's normal nowadays.
Well, we've become so conditioned as we've seen inflation, all these different factors. We've seen the cost of power and electricity.
It's normalized.
So, and it's changed quickly. 10 years ago, a $500 electric bill would have been completely unheard of. People are now conditioned to it. And what they don't realize is that the cost of doing this, especially with a company like EG4, and making sure that you find the right contractor to do it with, like someone like you, that cost, it pencils out very easily and very quickly, because you own, man, I know the old solar saying is own your power, right? You're genuinely now energy independent.
Yeah.
You have power and control over the resources to produce your electricity.
To
You
hold
keep
it.
that energy on site, and it doesn't go anywhere else. When you have an energy storage system and the capability to do things like generator tie-in and all that stuff that we have the capability to do without any additional equipment needed,
You're playing by your own rules.
you're playing by your own rules.
And that's, everybody likes a loaded deck, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what batteries do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Skyler, I think on that note, man, we had a great discussion. Why don't we let the audience know? So to me, when I first reached out to you, I reached out to you on Instagram. I always thought you were Instagram famous because you have thousands of followers. So I was like, man, this guy's a big shot. You're an extremely humble guy, very down to earth. It's so funny. I didn't even know until this morning that we basically were in the solar business for the same company, albeit at different times.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I initially reached out, I was a little like, oh man, I know he's a big EG4 advocate. He's installing our product, but let me just reach out to him. You've been incredibly accommodating to us, and we hope to give you the same. What is your Instagram?
Sky the Solar Guy.
Sky the Solar Guy.
Yep.
And the name of your company?
Modern SLR.
Modern SLR. We will make sure that they check you out. And really want to thank you for joining us today. And it's been a great discussion.
Likewise.
Awesome. Well, everyone, with that, we're going to go ahead and close this show out. As we always say here at EG4, power more with EG4, and we stand for energy generation for everyone.